James Warren had never noticed the rain before, not really. It had always been background noise, something to silence with luxury car roofs and meetings that couldn't be missed. But on that particular Tuesday, the rain felt heavier, slower, almost like it was trying to pull him out of his usual path. Maybe that's why he stepped into the art gallery on the corner of Westbourne and Hart. It wasn't planned. James didn't do unplanned. His life had been shaped by generations of money, raised expectations, and calendar alerts. But when he ducked under the awning of Tate's studio and gallery, something in the window held him in place. It was a portrait. A man alone in a chair, half shadowed by light. His suit was pristine, his posture strong, but the eyes were different, unsettled, searching, vulnerable. James stood there for a full minute before the door swung open. "Come in, you'll block them, you," came a soft voice behind him. He turned. She was short, paint on her fingers and a wisp of dried crimson across her cheekbone. Her curls were tied into a loose knot at the nape of her neck, and her eyes, amber brown flecked with gold, were both warm and distant, like she was seeing him and seeing through him at the same time. "You painted this?" he asked, nodding toward the window. "I did," she replied, already walking back inside. "It's not for sale." James followed her in anyway. Amber Tate had long stopped being surprised by who walked through her gallery doors. Tourists, collectors, critics, she had seen them all. But there was something different about the man trailing behind her. He was too polished for this side of the city, too deliberate. His tailored coat alone probably cost more than her last 5 commissions combined. Still, he didn't gawk or point or ask if she could do something in blue to match a lobby wall. He simply looked. Really looked. "It's cold echo, by the way," she said, setting her paintbrush down. "It's about silence in a crowded room." He nodded slowly, then smiled for the first time. "You painted loneliness with too much honesty. It's unnerving." Amber gave a quiet laugh. "Good, that's the point." He stayed longer than he meant to. Asked questions, listened to her process, even bought a different painting. Stillness, a muted seascape with a single boat drifting away from shore. Before he left, he glanced at the canvas again. Is the chair empty because the man stood up? Or because he never arrived? Amber looked at him, tilting her head. "Come back tomorrow. I'll let you tell me." And he did. James returned the next day, and the next, until the gallery became his escape. Amber never asked about his last name, though she knew it. Warren was on half the high-rises downtown. She didn't ask about the photos she'd seen online, the woman on his arm, the fortune he came from. In her studio, none of that mattered. He brought coffee. She taught him the difference between burnt umber and raw sienna. He stood still for her while she sketched. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. Just existed together in that raw, painted silence. Their first kiss wasn't soft. It wasn't tentative. It was rushed, full of paint-stained fingers and breathless gasps in the back of the gallery, like they were both afraid the world would find them too soon. Amber knew better than to believe in fairy tales. She didn't imagine a man like James could stay. But in the moments when he was with her, when he held her hips like she was the only thing anchoring him to earth, she forgot all the reasons why it might end. James never told her the whole truth. That his engagement to Taylor Donovan was part of a corporate merger, arranged by families who traded influence like stocks. That he was supposed to be preparing for a future where love had no place, only profit, prestige, and appearances. But Amber saw the truth anyway. In the way he lingered. In the way he looked at her like she was both danger and home. She never asked him to choose. Not yet. It was just after the first snowfall. Amber had left the gallery early that night, her coat dusted with white, her cheeks flushed from the wind. James had sent a text. "Can't come by tonight. Something came up." That was the 3rd cancellation that week. She didn't press, didn't ask. But when she got home and tossed her coat across the couch, the silence in her apartment felt heavier than usual. She lit a candle, pulled one of his old button-downs from the chair he'd left it on, and poured herself a glass of wine. James had always been careful with his words. She noticed that from the beginning. Affectionate, yes. Passionate, absolutely. But deliberate. Measured. He never said, "I love you." Never said, "This is real." Still, she felt it. In the way he looked at her while she painted. In the way he whispered her name when he thought she was asleep. She believed that was enough. Until the next morning. Amber was flipping through her phone when a headline stopped her mid-scroll. Warren and Donovan, a winter gala to celebrate the merger of the year. There he was, James, black tuxedo, arm looped around Taylor Donovan's waist, smiling like a man who belonged in a different universe. Amber stared at the photo. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just froze. That night, she went to the studio, pulled the half-finished portrait she'd been working on, his portrait, and dipped her brush in black. One broad stroke across his face, then another, and another. She didn't stop until all that remained was the outline of what used to be. He showed up the next day. She didn't speak as he entered the gallery, didn't offer coffee, just stood there, arms folded, her heart pounding in her chest like it wanted to escape. "I wanted to tell you," James said quietly. "I just didn't know how." "Engaged?" she said, voice sharp. "You didn't know how to tell me you're engaged?" "It's complicated," he replied. "No, it's not. You chose her, or your family did. Either way, I was never going to be part of the equation, was I?" He reached for her hand, but she pulled back. "Amber, don't say you're sorry," she said. "You'll ruin the one honest thing we had." James didn't fight her. He didn't beg. He just looked at her, his jaw tight, his eyes dimmer than she'd ever seen them. And then he left. For good. Weeks passed. Amber threw herself into work. Painting, commissions, ignoring the ache in her chest that refused to dull. But something else began to change. Her body felt different. Heavy. Her moods flickered. She kept pushing it off, blaming stress, exhaustion, heartbreak. Until the morning she stood barefoot in her bathroom, staring at the 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. The room spun. Her hands trembled. She sat on the floor and cried. Not for James, not even for the betrayal, but for the tiny life now growing inside her. A life born of passion. A child that had no place in James Warren's carefully manicured world. She thought about telling him, wrote and rewrote a dozen messages, deleted every one. In the end, she decided the child deserved more than a man divided by legacy and guilt. She would raise this baby alone, love it with the same quiet intensity she once gave him. Amber Tate kept painting, even as her world narrowed to prenatal vitamins, swollen ankles, and sleepless nights filled with unspoken thoughts. She kept painting. It was how she breathed, how she processed the storm that had wrecked through her life and left her carrying a new one inside her. Her art changed, softened in some places, darkened in others. The figures were more solitary, the strokes more deliberate. She painted her pain, her hope, her child. She told no one the father's name, but the world was small, and James Warren's name still clung to her studio, in whispers and rumors, especially after stillness gained attention from a major collector who'd once dined with the Warrens themselves. Amber didn't know when they found out. Only that one afternoon, a silver SUV pulled up outside her gallery. The man who stepped out was tall, lean, and wore a black coat sharp enough to cut glass. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone used to controlling the outcome of every room he entered. "Miss Tate," he said as he stepped inside, "my name is Noah Strickland. I represent the Warren family." Didn't offer a seat. He held out a folder with ivory stationery inside, a legal document, a non-disclosure agreement, a check. She barely looked at the number. "This is a gift," Noah said smoothly, "to help you start fresh, preferably somewhere far from here. The Warren family believes in privacy, as I'm sure you do, too." Amber crossed her arms over her belly, already beginning to show. "Is this a threat?" "No," he replied. "It's a guarantee. If you take this offer, your art career will continue, discreetly, quietly. If you don't," he smiled without warmth, "well, collectors can be persuaded. Galleries can be warned. Your reputation is as delicate as a canvas, Miss Tate. A single tear, and the whole piece is ruined." She didn't sleep that night. She stared at the ceiling, her hands gently resting on the curve of her stomach. She thought of the child inside her, unborn, innocent, and already a target for shame. She thought of James, of the truth he'd never fought for, and she thought of every girl who'd been told to stay quiet so powerful men could live their lives. The next morning, she called Noah. "I'm not signing your silence," she said. "You'll have to destroy me." They did. Word spread quietly, but effectively. Amber Tate was difficult, unreliable, emotionally unstable. Her gallery's funding dried up. Her commissions were canceled. Her work was rejected from exhibitions without explanation. Within a month, she was forced to close. No one stood by her. No one questioned why the rising star of emotional realism had vanished from the scene. Amber packed up her studio with shaking hands and a fire in her chest. She moved to a coastal town 3 hours away, far from the city lights and the shadow of the Warren name. She rented a small cottage with peeling paint and a view of the sea. There, she gave birth to a baby girl. She named her Iris. Amber didn't return to the art world, not officially, but she still painted, quietly. In the sunlit corner of their cottage, she painted the ocean, her daughter's smile, the hollow ache that never quite left her chest, and in a drawer, beneath baby blankets and unopened letters, she kept Echo, the very first painting James had ever seen, the one that started it all. She had painted loneliness. Now she was living it. But in her daughter's laughter, her bright eyes and wild spirit, Amber found something she hadn't known she was missing. Not the man, but purpose. The cottage was small, but it had everything Amber Tate needed. Quiet mornings, the sea's hum just beyond the window, and Iris, her reason to keep breathing when the world had tried to silence her. Iris Tate was sunlight in motion, curious, creative, and always asking questions. Her eyes, stormy gray, flecked with hazel, were the only part of James that Amber couldn't paint away. From an early age, Iris had an unusual way of seeing things. At 5, she pointed at shadows and asked what color sadness was. At 7, she spent hours with pencils and scraps of cardboard, sketching faces she saw only once. By 10, she was painting with such focus and emotion that Amber would pause and watch her, heart tight with pride and something unnameable. Amber never spoke James's name to her daughter, not once. But sometimes, late at night, she'd catch Iris sketching a face that looked eerily familiar. Broad jaw, straight nose, deep set, unreadable eyes. Amber would say nothing, just quietly take the sketch and slide it into the drawer with Echo, the painting that had begun it all. One spring, their coastal town held a youth art showcase. It was small, hosted at the community center, with rows of easels, colored string lights, and children's laughter bouncing off the walls. Iris insisted on entering a new piece, something she'd been working on in secret. She called it The Man at the Window. Amber's heart dropped when she saw it. It was him, James, or some version of him filtered through Iris's brush. The suit, the eyes, the loneliness. He stood behind a rain-speckled window, looking out as if searching for something he wasn't sure he deserved to find. "I dreamed him again," Iris had said simply. "I don't know who he is, but I think he's missing someone." Amber couldn't breathe. She kissed her daughter's forehead and walked outside to keep from crying. The painting caught attention. A collector visiting the town on holiday, intrigued by the raw talent in such a young artist, purchased the piece and asked for more information about the young painter. When he returned to the city, he displayed the work at a small private gathering of fellow collectors and art investors. Among the guests was James Warren. He wasn't supposed to stay long. He rarely did anymore. His engagement to Taylor had long dissolved, the merger completed without the fairy tale ending. He stood in the corner with his drink, only half listening, until someone tapped his shoulder. "You'll want to see this one," the collector said. "Painted by a 10-year-old girl. Unbelievable skill. It's called The Man at the Window." James turned and froze. There he was. Not just a man, but him. Every detail, every shadow, the very expression he saw in the mirror when he let himself feel. The signature at the bottom stopped his heart. Iris Tate. He left without a word, but that night he searched the name, then the gallery, then the town, and the next morning, James Warren boarded a train heading south to the coast. The community center was quiet when he arrived. He walked the rows of painted pieces until he saw a small placard beside a watercolor sunset. Artist, Iris Tate, age, 10, contact, Tate Gallery Studio, South Bay Lane. His breath caught. He followed the address. When he reached the cottage, the garden was wild with marigolds and tall grass. A wind chime spun above the porch. He knocked once. Amber opened the door. Their eyes met. Years collapsed into that moment. She looked older, stronger, more self-assured. The woman who had once melted in his hands now stood with shoulders square, holding the door like a shield. Behind her, the faint sound of Iris's laughter drifted from inside. James didn't smile, didn't speak right away. "I saw the painting," he said finally. Amber didn't move. "James, she doesn't know who you are." "I know." "She's mine," Amber said, the old fire returning to her voice. "And you gave her up before she was born." He looked down. "I didn't know," she shot back. "You walked away." Silence. Then his voice, cracked and quiet. "I thought I had no choice." Amber's hands trembled at her sides. "You always had a choice," she whispered. "You just didn't choose me." Behind her, Iris appeared in the doorway. "Mom?" she asked, squinting at James. "Who is that?" Amber turned to her daughter, her voice softening. "Someone who used to know me." Iris tilted her head, then walked forward, slowly, curiously. She stood in front of James, looked up and said, "You look like my painting." James crouched to her level, eyes glassy. "And you look like someone I've been missing for a very long time." The next moments passed in a blur of words Amber didn't say, and breaths James couldn't take. Iris, with her untamed curls and wide, intelligent eyes, stood between them, this tiny force of clarity and truth. She looked between her mother and the man who looked too much like her own reflection to be a stranger. Amber finally stepped aside. "Come in," she said, her voice low and steady, but only for her. James stepped into the cottage that once might have been his life had he made different choices. The air smelled like turpentine and wildflowers. Paintings leaned against the walls, some finished, others waiting like he had, not knowing what would happen if he came. Amber disappeared into the kitchen to boil water, needing distance. James sat at the edge of the couch, careful not to disturb the sketchbooks scattered across the coffee table. Iris sat across from him, legs crossed, pencil in hand, watching him without fear. "Did you really like my painting?" she asked. "I loved it," James said honestly. "It surprised me." "You look sad in it," she said, tilting her head. "Are you?" He didn't lie. "I have been, for a long time." Iris scribbled something, then paused. "My mom paints sad people too, sometimes, but they always look strong underneath." James nodded slowly, the lump in his throat rising. "She's the strongest person I've ever known." Amber returned, setting a mug in front of him. Chamomile, no sugar. Just the way he used to take it when she still painted him like he was worth knowing. He looked up at her. "I didn't know she existed, Amber." "And if you had?" Her eyes narrowed. What would you have done? Taken her? Hid her like your family tried to hide me? James didn't flinch. I would have left them for you. Amber's jaw tensed. No, she said quietly. You did leave, but it wasn't for me. He nodded. You're right, I was a coward. I let them speak for me. I let them make the decisions, and I convinced myself it was too late to fix it. And now? She asked. Now I'm here. I don't expect forgiveness, or anything from you. He looked at Iris. I want to know her. I want to try, if she'll let me. Amber looked at her daughter, who was already back to sketching. She doesn't know who you are. Then I'll start as a friend. You'll be honest, Amber said firmly. No pretending, no disappearing. I promise. They both knew that words had failed them before, but in this quiet, sunlit room, with their daughter scribbling peace onto paper, the promise meant more than it once would have. Over the next few weeks, James visited often. No lawyers, no press, no demands. Just stories, sketchbooks, walks along the beach. He never tried to rewrite the past, only to prove he belonged in the present. Amber watched him, cautious, wary, but hopeful. One afternoon, she found Iris curled against James on the porch, asleep with a book on her chest. He had one arm around her protectively, the other flipping through a sketch pad she had made just for him. Amber stood at the doorway for a long time. Then she walked back inside, sat down at her easel, and began a new painting. Not of pain, not of loss, but of a man and a girl, framed in soft light, both searching for the part of themselves they never knew they'd lost. James had known the reckoning would come. The moment his family learned the truth, that Amber Tate had not only returned to his life, but had brought his daughter with her, they would react exactly as they always did. With control, with power, with ruthless preservation of the Warren image. And they did. It started with a phone call from his father. You've been missing board meetings. Again. James stood by his office window, watching the rain that once led him to Amber's gallery. I've been traveling. I know, South Bay, isn't it? A quaint coastal town. What exactly are you doing there? There was no use pretending. Visiting someone I should have never walked away from, and meeting someone I never knew existed. Silence crackled on the line. You're saying it's true then? You have a child? James didn't answer right away. I have a daughter, he said finally. Her name is Iris. The next day, James was summoned to the Warren estate. It was all there. Dark oak walls, ancestral portraits glaring down from every angle, and the same suffocating air of legacy that had shaped his life since birth. He stood in the center of the drawing room, across from his father, Gregory Warren, and his sister, Elaine, the sharp-eyed family strategist. This situation with Amber Tate, Gregory began, his tone cold and clinical, needs to be dealt with before the annual investors meeting. The whispers are already starting. She's not a situation, James replied. She's the mother of my child. Elaine leaned forward, her voice like glass. Do you realize the damage this could do to the company's reputation? You left her, James, and now you're parading around with a child out of wedlock like it's some kind of fairy tale. James bristled. I didn't know about Iris. That doesn't matter, Gregory said. What matters is how it looks. You were supposed to be the future of this company. Your engagement to Taylor Donovan was a strategic alliance, and now you've aligned yourself with a woman we paid to disappear. James stared at them both. You silenced her. His father shrugged. We protected you. You had a path, and she was a distraction. James laughed, low and bitter. No, she was the only real thing I ever had. And I let you convince me she didn't matter. Elaine stood, her expression devoid of sympathy. You need to choose, James. Stay with her and walk away from the company. From your seat, from the inheritance, or come back. Reinforce the brand. We'll make the story go away. Again. He felt like he was 25 again, suffocating under their thumb. Afraid to lose everything he'd been raised to believe was his only value. But now, he had something else. Someone else. 2, in fact. That night, James drove back to the coast. Amber was waiting on the porch. She didn't ask what happened. She knew just by the heaviness in his eyes. "They know," he said. She nodded. "And?" "They want me to give you up again, to choose the company, the image." Amber looked down, then back up. "And what do you want?" He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "I want to be the man you see when you look at me. The one Iris thinks I am. I want out of that life. Not because of you, or because of her, but because I finally know who I am without them." Amber didn't speak, not right away. Then she reached for his hand. "Then you'd better be sure, because if you walk away from them, there's no going back." James pulled her into his arms, tighter than he ever had before. "I don't want to go back." 3 days later, headlines rocked the city. James Warren steps down from Fania Company, cites personal priorities. The board was in chaos. The press speculated. But James didn't flinch. Because in a seaside town, Iris Tate waited for her next painting lesson with the man who had once been a ghost and was now learning, day by day, how to become a father. Amber watched him from across the studio, her heart no longer guarded, no longer questioning. He had finally chosen them. The storm had passed, but Amber knew healing didn't come all at once. James was back in their lives, but she kept the door open slowly, intentionally. Not out of punishment, but out of protection. For herself, for Iris, and for the delicate rhythm of the life they had built without him. James understood. He wasn't pushing, but was showing up, day after day. He helped with school projects, attended Iris's Saturday painting classes at the community center, and carried supplies for Amber without comment. They talked, sometimes about their past, sometimes about nothing at all, and every now and then he would stay for dinner. Not as a partner, not yet, but as family in process. What bonded them more than anything was Iris. By 11, Iris Tate was no longer a whisper of talent. She was a name. The piece that had first drawn James back to them, The Man at the Window, was being featured in a traveling youth exhibit. Critics called her emotionally gifted beyond her years. There was something about her brushwork, how she captured contradiction, softness with sorrow, light bending under weight, that made even seasoned collectors pause. Amber watched it all unfold with pride, but also with quiet anxiety. The art world had once swallowed her whole. She wouldn't let it devour her daughter. Amber sat Iris down one afternoon at their kitchen table, the sun warming her back. "I need you to promise me something," she said gently. Iris blinked. "Okay. No matter how many people ask you to paint what they want, you paint what you feel. What's true to you. Never forget that, okay?" Iris smiled. "I won't. I have your hands, remember?" Amber laughed softly, brushing a curl from her daughter's cheek. "You have something stronger. Your own voice." When the art fair invitation came from a prestigious gallery in New York, a scholarship showcase for the most promising teen artists in the country, it came addressed to Ms. Iris Tate, with a personal note. "Your eye is rare. We would be honored to present your work. Remy Art Collective." Amber read it twice, then once more, aloud to James, who was helping Iris clean her paintbrushes at the sink. He looked at Iris, then at Amber. "You okay with this?" he asked her. Amber took a long breath. "I will be, as long as we do it our way." So they went, together. New York was nothing like their sleepy town. The gallery buzzed with journalists, agents, and crowds with camera phones. But in a corner, on a stark white wall, hung The Girl and the Sea, Iris's newest piece. A reflection of herself, standing barefoot in the waves, her face turned toward the horizon. It was Amber's favorite. One reporter asked Iris, "Where do you get your emotional insight?" Iris shrugged. "I don't know. I just listen when I paint." Another asked, "And your father, was he your inspiration for The Man at the Window?" Amber tensed. James froze. Iris looked between them, then answered honestly, I didn't know him when I painted it, but I think I was painting something I missed. The room grew quiet. Iris smiled at James. Now I don't have to miss it anymore. That night, they returned to their hotel, tired and glowing with pride. Amber stood by the window, the city lights glimmering behind her. James walked up behind her, pausing just a few inches away. "She's brilliant," he said quietly. Amber nodded, her voice soft. "She is." He reached for her hand, hesitated, then gently laced his fingers through hers. She didn't pull away. "I don't want to just be in her life," James said. "I still want to be in yours, when you're ready." Amber turned to him, her gaze clear and steady. "I'm not there yet," she said honestly. He nodded. "I'll wait." "I know," she whispered. "And that's why I believe you." Later that night, Iris sketched by the window, while her parents sat quietly on opposite ends of the couch. Her pencil danced across the page, shading in shadows, giving form to a scene that lived only in her mind. When she was done, she held it up. A woman with a brush in one hand, a little girl in the other, and behind them, not ahead or apart, but with them, stood a man, not as a ghost in the background, but with open hands and a steady gaze. The gallery lights were still warm from the weekend showcase, but Amber felt a chill that had nothing to do with the New York weather. The headlines had exploded overnight. James Warren's secret daughter revealed. Heiress to the Warren legacy? Questions rise around young art prodigy. Amber had known the storm would come eventually, but nothing prepared her for the moment James stepped into their hotel suite and said the words she had dreaded for over a decade. "They want to meet her." Amber didn't need to ask who they were. Gregory and Elaine Warren. The father who had orchestrated her exile. The sister who had destroyed her career. The family who had chosen public image over flesh and blood. Amber's spine straightened. "No." James looked at her carefully. "I understand. I told them it wasn't up to me." "Damn right it's not," she snapped. Where was their curiosity when she was just a name buried under silence? Where was that when I was packing up my life with a swollen belly and no support? James sighed. "They said the media pressure is growing. Investors are starting to question why they didn't acknowledge Iris sooner." Amber scoffed. "So now she's a liability worth managing?" But before she could say more, a quiet voice came from behind the doorway. "I want to meet them." Amber turned. Iris stood in the doorway in her pajama shorts and oversized art camp t-shirt, her sketchbook still clutched under her arm. Her voice was steady, her expression unreadable. I want to look them in the eyes." Amber took a step toward her. "You don't have to prove anything to them, baby." "I'm not," Iris said. "But they took years from me, from you, from Dad. And I want them to know what they lost. I want them to feel it." Amber hesitated, her heart splitting between fear and pride. James didn't say a word. Finally, Amber said, "Okay, but you don't go in there alone." "I wouldn't dare," Iris whispered, and gave her mother a small smile. The meeting was set for the next morning, private, controlled, at a discreet office suite owned by the Warren family, just a few blocks from the art district. Amber entered with Iris on one side and James on the other. She kept her expression like steel, her eyes locked ahead, daring anyone to question her daughter's place in the room. Gregory stood at the far end of the table. Still powerful, still intimidating, but a flicker of discomfort danced behind his firm posture. Elaine sat to his left, her dark suit perfectly pressed, her expression unreadable, but her foot tapped nervously under the table. Iris didn't wait. She sat down, folded her hands and said, "Why did you hate me before you knew me?" Silence. Amber felt her jaw tighten, but she let her daughter speak. "I was just a baby," Iris continued. "And you were already deciding I wasn't worth being in the picture. Why?" Elaine opened her mouth, then closed it. Gregory cleared his throat. "It wasn't about you, Iris. You have to understand." "No," she interrupted. "I don't have to understand. You didn't just ignore me. You erased my mom. You humiliated her. Tried to make sure no one remembered her name. And all because what? She wasn't born into money? She was reckless with timing, Elaine said, trying to keep composure. You were born into a complicated situation. Iris narrowed her eyes. You mean I was born into your inconvenience? James reached across the table, gently placing his hand over Iris's. Gregory shifted uncomfortably. You have every right to be upset, but we were protecting James, the family name. Then maybe, Iris said softly, you should have protected his family too. Amber blinked at the restraint in her daughter's voice, so young, yet so poised. She had spent years preparing for the storm. Without realizing it, she had raised a girl who could walk into the very fire that once consumed her and come out unburned. I could have had birthdays with my dad, Iris said, her voice cracking just slightly. I could have grown up painting in his arms, instead of wondering why I only looked like half of someone. You took that from us. From me. Gregory looked away. Elaine's eyes glistened with something that might have been regret. I don't want anything from you, Iris said. No inheritance, no press release. I don't even care if your investors think I'm a scandal. But you will remember this. I am not your secret. I'm your consequence. Amber reached over and touched Iris's hand, the pride in her chest bigger than any gallery show, any article, any critic. James looked at his daughter with wet eyes, and Gregory Warren, for the first time in decades, had nothing to say. They left the building in silence, the sun warming their backs. Amber slipped her arm around Iris as they stepped onto the sidewalk. You okay? She whispered. Iris nodded. Yeah, I just wanted to look them in the eye. Let them know I wasn't afraid. James walked a step behind, his voice low but certain. They didn't deserve you. But I will never take this time for granted again. Amber looked at him. No, James, we won't. Because now, they were doing it differently. Together. 2 years later, the name Iris Tate didn't just whisper through art circles, it roared. Critics no longer called her promising, they called her defining. She was the youngest artist ever invited to showcase a solo collection at the Landmark Gallery in San Francisco, a space that once had walls too polished for anyone without pedigree, yet now braced itself for a girl who built her name in truth and brushstrokes. The show was titled Unframed. It was Iris's story, in color. In shadow, in silence broken, Amber walked through the gallery slowly, pausing at each painting. She didn't hover like a mother. She studied them as an artist. Each piece felt like an echo of the little girl who once painted from the floor of their sunroom. Only now, the strokes were bolder, the lines braver. The final canvas in the center of the room took her breath away. It was a family portrait, but not a traditional one. Amber stood with a paintbrush in hand, her form mid-motion. James, on the other side, held a book, open but set down, his eyes on them both, and Iris stood between them, 1 foot forward, a canvas before her, the future behind her. There was no gold frame, no ornate finish. Just raw wood around the edges, unframed, unhidden, unapologetic. Amber felt a hand slide into hers. James. He wore no tie, just a navy blazer and an open collar shirt. The man who had once been a polished heir now stood beside her, not as a figure of wealth, but of redemption. You didn't tell me she painted us, he whispered. She didn't, Amber said softly. She saw us. He nodded, his gaze locked on the canvas. You think I'll deserve being in that picture? Amber turned to him fully, brushing a hand down his chest. You're not in the picture because of the past. We're in it because you stayed. He looked at her then, not as the man who had once walked away, but as the one who had found his way back, brick by brick. I love you, Amber, he said, for the first time in a place where the whole world could see. Amber smiled. "I know, but don't rush me," she teased. "I'm still putting on the final coat." He laughed quietly, and they turned back toward the crowd gathering around Iris's final piece. Iris stood across the room, surrounded by reporters and patrons, but her eyes found her parents. She raised a glass of sparkling cider and gave a small, knowing smile, the kind that said, "I painted our truth." Amber lifted hers in return. For the first time, their story wasn't being erased, rewritten, or hidden behind closed doors. It was hanging on the walls of the world. The invitation arrived in thick cream stock with embossed lettering. The Iris Tate Foundation for Emerging Artists. Inaugural Gala and Scholarship Launch, hosted by James Warren. Amber stood in the quiet of her studio, the invitation in one hand. 2 years had passed since Iris's unframed show stunned the art world. Since the confrontation with the Warren family. Since the man who once broke her heart returned and rebuilt his place beside it. Day by patient day. James hadn't proposed with diamonds or spectacle. He had waited. Quietly, respectfully, until she was ready. Until she knew. On the night of the gala, the ballroom buzzed with elegance and purpose. But it wasn't like the Warren events of the past, polished but empty. No, this was different. The air crackled with promise, youthful energy, color, hope. A banner hung above the stage, "Invest in expression, not expectation." Amber stood at the edge of the crowd, wearing a silk navy gown and a silver cuff Iris had made by hand. She watched James at the podium, no longer an heir chained to his family's name, but a man who had chosen to build something for his daughter's future. "For years," he said into the mic, his voice firm but full of warmth, "my daughter painted truths I wasn't ready to face. Now we're making sure other young artists have the space to tell their truths, without apology, without limits." The room erupted in applause. Iris stood near the front, cheeks flushed, dressed in emerald green, looking grown in ways Amber still had trouble accepting. Her hand brushed Amber's as she returned to her side. "I know what you're thinking," Iris whispered with a grin. "You're proud of him." Amber chuckled, squeezing her daughter's fingers. "I might be." After the speeches, James found Amber alone on the terrace, looking out at the city skyline. She turned as he approached, heels clicking on stone. "Well, Mr. Warren," she said, teasing, "you clean up all right." James pulled her gently into his arms, resting his forehead against hers. "I've waited 2 years," he said softly. "Every day, I wondered if you'd ever say yes." Amber leaned in, her voice a whisper in the space between them. "Then you'd better get down on one knee again, because I'm ready now." James's eyes widened, just for a second, before he smiled like a man who had just been handed a new life. He dropped down instantly, right there on the terrace. No speech, no velvet box, just a whispered, "Marry me." Amber grinned. Of course. They married in a private ceremony by the sea. Iris stood between them, holding their hands during the vows. And months later, as summer unfurled into golden afternoons, Amber sat in her sunroom, sketching a new piece, her hand slowly circling a small, barely visible swell in her belly. James entered the room with a cup of tea. He froze, then looked at her, eyes wide, cautious hope blooming across his face. Amber just smiled and whispered, "Looks like we're getting another masterpiece." He sank to his knees and pressed his forehead gently against her stomach. "Thank you," he whispered, "for letting me have all of it." In the house by the sea, where portraits were never painted to hide the truth, the Tate Warren family began a new canvas. Not of heartbreak, but of healing. Not of silence, but of legacy. Theirs. Together. Forever unframed. The end. Hope you enjoyed this wonderful story by Green Tea Tales. Help our channel to grow with likes, shares, and subscribes.